Good morning, one and all. Very good morning, one and all. On the behalf of Bharati Vidyapeeth deemed to be University, Pune College of Pharmacy, I, Dr. Shilpa Shrotriya, welcome you all on second day of online 1 week AICTE sponsored STP on healthcare startups, evolution to revolution. Today we have Mr. Shivpuje, Mr. Vijay Shivpuje with us. I welcome you, sir. Mr. Vijay Shivpuje, he is a director, Patlex Business Solution, a knowledge process outsourcing firm practicing in patent and design. He is IPR lead, IPFE ASSOCHAM, New Delhi. He is also mentor of Change with Government of India, Niti Aayog's Atal Tinkering Lab. He is also mentor for Startup India, Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Government of India. He is a co-founder, Pharma Literally, an online education initiative which is working actively in the area of pharmaceutical education and have collaborated with various institutions and universities for skill-based activities. He is registered patent agent, Indian Patent Office. He has completed his M.Pharmacy with LLB degree and having 16 plus years of experience in pharma corporates, law firm and consultancy. Sir has conducted 100 plus IPR awareness program at various universities, colleges, bar associations, incubation centers, custom office, industry chambers, etc. Sir has awarded by ASSOCHAM for outstanding contribution in IPR awareness in 2020. With this brief introduction, I welcome you, sir, with this virtual bouquet. Welcome you. And now I request sir to proceed for the session with his talk, that is regulatory aspect and patentability of healthcare startups. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Shilpa, and thank you so much, Dr. Vividha. Just a quick check if I'm clearly audible to everyone.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much, Pune College of Pharmacy, for arranging this wonderful SCTP, which is, I think, the need of the hour. And I must take this opportunity to congratulate all of you, the entire team of Pune College of Pharmacy, Honorable Principal Sir, Vice Principal Sir, Varsha Ma'am, Dr. Vividha, who is the coordinator, and Dr. Shilpa as well. And it's a privilege for me, again, like, in a gap of 3 weeks, I'm here for the second time, for the second SCTP. But then in 3 weeks, a lot of things have changed. And I would say the topic that have been allotted to me is a bit complex because I have to speak more on regulatory as well, which is not my area of expertise, but I'll try to cover some of the part of related to that as well. One thing that has changed in last 3 weeks when I was here at this forum of Pune College of Pharmacy for SCTP is, in last week actually, Shark Tank India khatam ho gaya, and suddenly life it changed for everyone, in terms of startup community, startup ecosystem, what we are working since last almost 3 or 4 years. We have, the entire ecosystem that is there in India, always government or many agencies are doing a lot of efforts in terms of penetrating the entrepreneurship or the startup ecosystem at the very ground level. But these were all sporadic efforts that were happening at different places in, I would say, different capacity as well as but then the real penetration, I believe, came because, or all I would say, was all because of Shark Tank India, that and all of everyone, of course, it was more of entertainment as well. But then there were a lot of lessons that came from Shark Tank India. And I believe right time for us as well to know more about the startup ecosystem basically. And one thing which was very peculiar about Shark Tank India, I would say, is that fortunately we had one of the sharks who is from the pharma domain, as well as if you have seen the episodes, generally we have got more number of startups who are coming from the food tech, food nutraceuticals, or I would say some of them were also from the farm, not typical pharma, but I would call it as a typically the life sciences domain basically. And in fact, now everyone is thinking about having their students specifically are specifically thinking about having their own setup, own startups actually. In fact, in the morning itself, I got a call from a batch of engineering students working in Kerala. They have developed some product and they want to take it ahead, both in terms of commercialization as well as IPR protection. And actually, these are the two things actually when we say regulatory and patentability. These are the two things actually which are very significant as far as the
कैसा है तुम्ही
pharma.
तू कैसा है
Request the participants to please
अच्छा अच्छा मैडम को इसलिए वो
mute themselves.
Okay, so when we think of pharma or life sciences kind of product, two separate things are involved. One is the regulatory aspect and one is a patent actually. I'll just generally when I speak to academicians, patent is generally considered as a part of regulatory affairs. But from the industry perspective, or generally the way we practice, a patent expert like me doesn't know anything about regulatory affairs actually. These are two separate things. I'm gonna cover the misconceptions actually about the regulatory affairs, or I would say some misconceptions even about the patents that are very important for everyone to understand. And especially when you are a teacher, when you are teaching basically, as well as nowadays many of these institutions have also got the pre-incubators or incubators as well, wherein students come to them with their ideas and they want to do a lot of things basically with those ideas. In fact, I remember it was 3 or 4 months back, I got a call from one of the students from Pune College of Pharmacy about her idea, and she wanted to protect it, but then she was already working with the incubation center actually. Now, that point of time, as a faculty or as a institution, we also need to be very clear about what are we providing to the students, as well as what is actually required for that startup or that particular product as well. Because in many cases, patent may not be possible basically. Of course, I'll be discussing in detail all these things. But then also important is that when we have those ideas coming to us as an incubator or as an institution, we are in a position to actually give them right kind of advice or connect them with the right kind of people who can take that product to the market actually. We have always been thinking of ideas, and we have been discussing about ideas a lot actually. And generally when I deal with my clients that point of time, many a times the very first thing they tell me is that, sir, this is a unique idea. We don't want anyone else to copy this idea. I'll tell you a small incident which had actually happened with respect to that ideation, or what we call as an idea basically. So we had Mr. Varun Sridhar, the CEO of Paytm Money, for one of our events. He had mentioned a story, a wonderful story actually. Just 2 minutes, I'll discuss that, and I'll tell you how is that story is significant. So Mr. Varun Sridhar was in Hyderabad for some pitching basically, the way it is happening in Shark Tank India. So many startups pitch basically for the investment basically. So that point of time, there were almost 100 plus startups in Hyderabad. And Mr. Varun Sridhar asked that, how many of you, to the full crowd, how many of you are willing to share your idea in front of everyone? There was only 1 or 2 people who were willing to share that idea in front of everyone. And the same thing when Mr. Varun Sridhar did in Bangalore, that point of time, out of 195 people were willing to share their idea in front of everyone. What is the difference now? Why is it happening? And why the maybe in Hyderabad people are not willing to share that idea, and in Bangalore we have more number of people willing to share that idea. And what he mentioned was something which is very unique, or I would say the most significant part, and that is always neglected. What he mentioned is that in Bangalore we have a very vibrant kind of startup culture or ecosystem. It's never about an idea. The same idea can come to anybody's mind basically. If you, especially in that age of, let's say 15 to 25, when we are at our best, basically creatively, that point of time, we may have a lot of ideas, but it's not just about ideas. It's more about how you execute it. If you are looking for some business ideas, just ping me. I'll give you tens, hundreds of business ideas, but it's never about an idea. It's more about how you execute those ideas, how you actually, I would say, take that product to the market actually. That is more significant. And that's where I believe most of us, even including me, lack that expertise because we are not actually aware of. And unfortunately, our education system doesn't talk much on this front, doesn't give us any, I would say, expertise in terms of execution, commercialization, simple things. Like, for example, if a student or a faculty, let us say, has to start his or her own firm, what it would be? Would it be a LLP, private limited company, or a partnership firm? We have to start from very basic fundamental thing. And unfortunately, when it is for the pharmaceuticals or healthcare kind of products, we know the, I would say, we know the complex parts more than the simple parts basically, because again, our education system doesn't provide us any specific guidance about entrepreneurship, how to take your products to the market rather than just ideating and filing a patent or getting it granted basically. Fortunately, because of, I would say, the NAC, NB and NRF, everyone is filing patent, and we have got a lot of patent filings in last few years, but then what are we doing with those patents beyond those numbers game? What are we getting involved into? What is that significant thing that we can do with those patents as well? Everyone, I had this one LinkedIn post from one of the professors in Sholapur, not from pharma, but engineering. He got a patent granted, and what he mentioned is, I got a patent granted, now I am looking for someone to buy this patent. As if you have got a patent granted, then probably someone is waiting when is patent granted to you, and I'll give you $1 million and take your that patent. That doesn't happen. We cannot be those I would say if you have a, I would say, a good patent agent or a patent attorney, for any invention you can get the patent granted, but commercializing the product is something which is important, and that's what the startup ecosystem is about. And commercializing the product, unless and until we do that, I'm pretty confident that we are not making justice to the talent or the ideas or the execution or the energy that our students have. And it's our I would say duty. If you look at the new education policy, for which I spoke a couple of weeks back, now gone are the days when the teachers are only expected to teach. They were expected to do research, they were expected to publish. Thereafter, now they are expected to help their students ideate, as well as after 10 years, probably the teachers are also expected to come up their own business setup or startups as well. That's how the education system is getting transformed now. And in that context, I think this particular STTP, wherein we are focusing more on I would say the startup ecosystem and commercialization of that. With I had that opportunity to go through the entire agenda for the SCTP, and it's curated very nicely, I would say, and as well as we have got wonderful speakers as well. So in this entire context, I would like to also contribute a bit with my expertise on patent and a bit on, I would say, the regulatory part as well. Let me share my screen. Just a quick check if you can see my screen clearly.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm going to speak on regulatory aspect and patentability for healthcare startups. What is a startup basically? Because many people have that misconception about the concept of a startup basically. Then what are those healthcare startups and what are the regulatory and the patent basically? Now, startup has been something which has been a term which has been used by many agencies as well as governments since last few years with the Startup India, Make in India kind of schemes as well from the government of India actually. But then how is a startup? Because in entrepreneurship generally, when we were learning like 20 years back, that point of time entrepreneurship typically in a pharma was always with respect to the having a setup, a business setup of plant, a manufacturing unit, having those FDA licenses, having huge investment, and those kind of things were part of the entrepreneurship. But the startup ecosystem or startup as a concept is different from the typical entrepreneurship in a way that startup basically it's a company again, but I mean the way we establish a company, it's exactly the same way we establish a startup as well. But then the difference herein, the major difference herein in terms of startup or a typical entrepreneurship is that herein the development part or the validation is something, as well as the scalability of the business model. So for example, if I have to actually start a business and scale it up, scaling up is basically a growth. Generally what we see is that in terms of growth, we have pharma companies which are established 40-50 years back, and they are at a valuation of, let's say, 200 or 300 crore. In fact, I have a client in Mumbai, a Mumbai-based client, whose valuation is around 300 crore, but the company is established 40 years back. From scratch to that, it required not just 40 years, a lifetime of I would say the tenure basically in which the company grew basically. But if you look at typically the startup ecosystem, again coming back to the Shark Tank India kind of examples, wherein we had young students, 20-22 aged students asking for 2 CR, in few cases 40, 50, 100 CR valuation. How are these valuations calculated actually? And what is the difference that in a year, 6 months time, you are reaching a 5 crore valuation? How is it actually happening? That's what we call as a scalability of the business, or what we also call it as the kind of a growth that happens is really very fast. Basically, startup ecosystem is something which is generally presumed to be only dependent on technology, but that's not the case. Of course, most of the startups are coming from the technology domain, but then there are a lot of startups which are not involving any kind of, I would say, the technology as well. Startup ecosystem, as I said, is something which has been in India since almost a decade. But then now, I would say in last 1 or 2 years, especially during COVID, when we came up with a lot of innovations and all, that point of time, startup ecosystem has really grown really well, I would say. I'm going to just to start with, because I want each one of you to first understand what is startup ecosystem. Of course, this is one thing that would be discussed again and again throughout your all sessions, as well as there would be some case studies as well, which give you better clarity on what is a startup or different examples basically. But in layman's language, a traditional business and a startup, that's how I compare. Traditional businesses maybe we had a lot of examples in Shark Tank India wherein there were some restaurants, some kind of people coming up with some food products and kind of things. So what we call typically in a startup, the business model generally, the traditional businesses are generally the me too kind of business. Typically in pharma cases, if I can call this as, someone is selling there are hundreds of companies who are selling paracetamol or diclofenac. What do? You just start another company and me too kind of business, which is you start selling those drugs again, basically. You are just 101th or 110th player. Traditional businesses work in this particular way, but startups generally have got different kind of business models as well. How we'll see with lot of examples actually, because I have included some of these examples as well here. Now the second and most important part for the startup ecosystem or startup business, and as we have seen that in a year you're asking for a valuation of 5 or 10 CR probably. Scalability or the growth model, basically the scale up of the business, and these terms we have heard again and again in Shark Tank India. My entire session kind of would be, first part would be based on the Shark Tank India, because I think that is how you would be in a position to correlate with the startup ecosystem basically. So in a startup, the scalability or the growth is really high and very fast basically. So when someone is investing money that point of time as well, what they are asking is not 5x or 10x, 5 times or 10 times growth nahi chahiye unko. What they want is 100 or 200 times. Now 100 times growth, is it possible basically? Yes, with technology or with some kind of, I would say, better business skills or business models, 100x growth is possible, still possible, 100 times growth, because the so-called unicorns, which have got the $1 billion valuation, $1 billion, which turns out around 7,500 crore valuation, they are just developed 10 years back, basically, 8 or 10 years back. In 3-4 years time as well, you can reach to that kind of valuation what Lenskart has reached basically. Scalability or the growth part, so in cases of startup is really very high. But again, compare it to typical businesses or a typical pharma business, therein you have one factory, let's say, and you have to establish another, forget about a factory, you have one medical shop, you have to establish another medical shop. It requires a lot of efforts and lots of years as well as an individual basically, because in traditional businesses, the scalability or growth is comparatively low and slow basically. As I said, most of the startups are technology driven. There is some kind of technology that is used more in most of the cases, but that's not the only thing. So for example, I'll tell you some of the products as well, wherein they have been registered as a startup and how they're actually doing pharma, healthcare related products as well. Okay. In cases of traditional businesses, maybe again, I'll compare it to a medical shop, for a medical shop owner. We are just dependent on the payment part. For the payment part, probably we are taking the payments through the payment app or the UPI. Or what we are also doing is probably we are getting the entire inventory managed on a software. That's it. Beyond that, we're not using the technology basically. But then you compare it with the product, with the e-pharmacy. Now, e-pharmacy are allowed or not, we are not going into those details. I'll go into those details at the time of regulatory hurdles kind of stuff that I'll be discussing. But comparatively, in startup businesses, the technology is used very effectively, I would say, compared to the traditional businesses. What grows very fast comes down or may fall flat rapidly as well. What you are seeing in Shark Tank India, basically those 30, 40, 50 odd cases that we saw in the last 3-4 months actually is just a very, very minute or a small number of the failures that startup ecosystem has. Daily, so many startups start and they fail. The failure rates in case of startups is really very high. And this is one thing that is completely, I would say, against the education system, because our education system doesn't allow us to fail basically. But startup ecosystem, if you have like, if you remember any of those episodes wherein the sharks are asking what's your background, and therein if someone has a prior experience with a startup, that works really well for those. In startup ecosystem, failure is actually considered as a good thing, because that may help me. In fact, I had my first startup failure in 2017 when I started my my firm basically. So I had an edutech platform. I failed miserably. I invested some money into it, but then fortunately I exited it at a very early stage basically. Failures in startups are common, really very high compared to traditional business. Because if you start a medical shop or a medical company, basically that point of time, the chances that it would fail are really very less. Startup ecosystem is not meant for someone who is not in a position to take the risks actually. And that's where I think it gets differentiated from the traditional businesses basically. In case of traditional businesses, what we have seen is that the businesses get transferred to the next generations basically. So someone has a business and it will be transferred to the next generation actually. But in case of startups, generally what we have seen is there are exit deals. That means someone is willing to share the sell the stake basically. So you prepare a brand, take it to a level, sell it and move out of that. So we have seen a lot of companies in India which are not now with the founders or the co-founders. The founders or co-founders have exited, they have sold their stake basically. So there is always a so-called exit strategy in cases of startups, but traditional businesses don't have these kind of. So I would say startup ecosystem is something which is short to mid-term, and traditional businesses generally look for long-term kind of stuff. But then, as I said, the growth is really very fast. Maybe at times you would be reaching that scale or stage which probably traditional businesses would achieve in 20-25 years time. Funding. Now, I think we don't need to discuss much about this because everyone has live seen what kind of funding options are available for the startups compared to the traditional businesses. Traditional businesses generally are dependent on the bank loans. Even nowadays, we have got for the startup ecosystem something called as for even students without any collateral. We have the Mudra Loan available by these Government of India. This PSUs basically wherein you can get a loan of up to 10 lakh for a startup or a small business or a MSME or a venture, wherein I think for next 3 years you don't need to pay that, as well as after that it's at a very, very lesser interest basically. Now, so there are a lot of funding opportunities, but then remember that funding comes with liabilities as well, because you are giving your stake in the company. And I think this is what we also saw with the Bharat Pay, the startup by Ashneer Grover, who was one of the sharks actually. There is a feud going on actually. So while you are selling the stake actually, or so there would be someone else pitching in with the money actually, and they may try to control the company. That's how it works. That's the disadvantage of funding. You can start your own startup with your own money, what we also call as a bootstrap. So in my ventures basically are completely bootstrap. We haven't given any stake or share to anyone actually. The most significant part wherein I would say in case of startup ecosystem is the IP generation, or what we also call as a innovation angle. And in fact, the Government of India, if you want the startup registration with the Ministry of Commerce and Industries, they need to have some kind of innovation mentioned in the model that you have actually come up with for the startup. So this is how a startup ecosystem is different from the traditional businesses. We are very much aware of traditional businesses. Most of us are aware, and the businesses may be as small as the medical shops or as big as a multinational pharmaceutical organization, right? And but again, now what kind of businesses are there in terms of healthcare startups or pharma startups? Basically, what are people doing actually? And when I say pharma startups, I have got a list, I would say, of the products or the startups which are from the basically the healthcare domain, and which are available in India. And we have, as a pharma life science, one good thing that has happened during last 2 years is COVID has actually given the healthcare or the life sciences industry the real boost which was needed, because people have started focusing more on the healthcare as well as the nutraceutical or nutritional kind of stuff, right? So there are a lot of avenues, a lot of opportunities for pharma. Where can we actually pitch in that case, or where are people working? Basically, we'll try to see with this some of these examples. Just a small disclaimer, I'm not recommending any of these for startups, or there is no conflict of interest for me. Just for the information purpose, I have included these firms, and if any one of you have heard me earlier, there would be some repetition of the slides as well. Yeah. Now, what are those startups in the healthcare domain? To start with, one of the most conflicting, I would say, or the most debatable thing in the India is about e-pharmacy or online pharmacy. There are a lot of things going on simultaneously, whether it's allowed, whether it's not allowed. What is government doing? Is it coming under the central government, state government? At few locations, it's allowed, they say. So there are court matters also going on. But let me tell you something. If you have food being delivered, if you have your cab coming to your home, so I'm speaking about Ola, Uber, Swiggy, Zomato, everything is coming to your house with a click. There would be some time for sure wherein e-pharmacies would be there in India. When, how much time is required, we don't know. What is going on that front, on the policy perspective as well as the court litigations? So there are multiple ifs and buts in that, but for sure at some point of time this is gonna happen. And these are some of the startups like 1mg.com. Typical online pharmacies, the model is exactly same as that of, I would say, as that of your the Swiggy, Zomato, or Ola, Uber, what we call typically as an aggregator kind of model. Okay, wherein so Swiggy, Zomato, as of now, they don't own any restaurant. What they do is they just connect the restaurants with the customers. Basically, I order on Swiggy, I get the food from the restaurant that I want. So they are the mediators basically. Exactly same thing is a kind of a model for a startup. And as I said, there are these kind of startups which are also available in India. I think currently they are only restricted to the metros or beyond a stage. I would say the which are heavily densely populated kind of I would say the locations. These kind of startups are available. But then yes, there are a lot of startups that are upcoming, and in fact, I think a few years back rather, there is some stake of Tata's as well into 1mg.com, if I'm not wrong actually. Yeah. Another startup which is something I recommend, I am I would say, I know the co-founder personally. He's my senior. He's from pharma basically. WonderRx. This is something which is involved into digitizing the prescriptions. What do you mean by digitizing the prescription basically? So the doctors have this habit of writing on the prescription pad, and thereafter what happens with that paper? Basically, we take that paper and maybe after some time that paper is useless for us. Now what these people have done wonderfully actually, in fact I had seen the demo as well. In fact, Pankaj was on our pharma literary platform at some point of time, wherein he gave us a demo of how the system works actually. And so one of those things which is important in case of doctors or startups, basically, if you're coming up with the product, important thing is that you don't need to change the behavior. People's behavior should not change, because there is always a resistance to change the behavior. And what is that behavior? Doctors were always given that option to digitize their prescriptions, wherein they were told to type or write on the screen or a tab about the prescription. But what this system does it, they provide you a kind of a paper like this, simple paper, and they give you a pen, normal pen, like, when you write, there's also, this is a specialized paper and pen they have developed. Not developed, I would say, they have actually in license, they have got the technology from someone else. At the same time, the moment you write, automatically everything is on your iPhone or phone, basically. Everything is on the tab or the iPhone, and all this data. Now, imagine the kind of data that is getting generated now. What we were dependent on in last 2 or 3 years, COVID time, what is the therapy available? Initially, we started with plasma therapy, remdesivir. Of course, Dolo did a huge business actually, but it was symptomatic. Then trastuzumab and so many things. We were so much dependent on the data. How is the data collected, basically? Let me tell you, data is the king in case of healthcare domain. That's what they are doing. They are digitizing those prescriptions. Visit wonderrx.com. If you want, I can get you guys connected with the co-founder as well. He's a graduate in pharmacy from my institute where I did my undergrad. He's my senior actually, and he's involved into this particular startup. Another startup everyone knows, I would say, in the healthcare domain is Practo. Again, use of the technology aggregator, connecting doctors with the patients, basically, whenever you want. And Practo, there are so many new platforms have come, like Practo. We have this M-Fine, if you have seen those advertisements on the television channel and all. There are so many startups like this which have come up in recent past. Again, use of the technology. Blood sugar, if you Google out, you would very easily come to know. If we can connect the food, the restaurants with the foodies, and I'm ordering the food. Why can't we have this on an app through, for collecting the blood or platelet donors? This is what is done in from the bloodsure.in. Bloodsure is a startup, I believe, based in Hyderabad, which is an aggregator platform. If you go to the blood banks, basically, again, blood bank is an important aspect of a healthcare ecosystem, right? In that case, they have a list of people in their database who are blood donors, actually, from the group wise as well as the platelet donors as well. They have aggregated all this data, and with a single click, you can have, of course, whether the service is available in each location, that we don't know. But then this is something which is a wonderful cause, as well as I would say, which is a need of the hour, using technology for solving your normal problems, basically. One of the important aspects which has been about the startup ecosystem is that people in the startup ecosystem are always trying to solve some problem. There is a business, but with some social angle as well. Many a times you would find that actually happening, actually, So in fact, an idea for a startup always starts with a problem and the solution for that. Now, this is where the IP part, I would say, is significant, and that's how I suggest the students or the faculties to start with when they start with their thesis. What we do, we try to come up with the product and find its applications generally. We try to identify or come up with a solution first and try to understand what problems we can solve with this solution. In fact, that's what exactly I did 5 years back when I came up with my edutech platform. I failed very badly. But the real success of a startup ecosystem or the startup is when you identify a problem, identify a solution for that, and not only identifying the solution, it has to be innovative solution, and the third important part is execute it in a most effective way. We have a lot of people who can tell you about this first part, identifying the problems. In fact, हमारे यहाँ पे most of the people tell us start telling problems only. कुछ बात करना शुरू हो जाओ, कुछ आपकी प्रॉब्लम है, सामने वाले को बोलो, सामने वाला 10 प्रॉब्लम खुद की बता देगा. There's so many problems around, right? Then second part as well, the ideation part is also something which has been, so there are a lot of ideas, a lot of people coming up actually, like, you know, with various ideas. Basically we have that kind of expertise as well, the first and the second one. Second to third, taking that product, you have an idea to market it, execute it. Unfortunately, we don't have that expertise, and we never tried to create those expertise as well, right? Because we were always, I would say, more bothered about our KRAs, or maybe the impact factor of the publications. Probably, of course, these are the essential things in your profile or your job as well. These are essentials, but beyond that, can we actually think in a long term which can make an impact on the society? It's not necessary that your startup should be in the healthcare domain. Why can't you have a startup in your own domain, which I would say the edutech domain, which I am working on, providing the best innovation in India came 2 years back during the first lockdown. Each of the teacher who was always taking the help of the chalk and the blackboard, they started teaching on Zoom. Suddenly someone is 50-55 years old who probably always used to check the emails through their research scholars or masters, suddenly had to teach through Zoom. That's the real adaptation or innovation started at that point of time. We could have come up with in our own specific domains, what are our strengths basically. And in the startup ecosystem, everyone thinks of, or everyone tries to understand the strengths first and then work on that. That's how I would say startup ecosystem is different from the traditional business. This is about blood sugar. Then I love the domain of diagnostics basically, specifically. Because this is one domain wherein there are a lot of immense opportunities. We have seen that COVID-19 ke time pe bhi, the detection of the COVID-19 itself was a bigger challenge in the early days. There was so much of innovation happening on that front. Beto and Niramai, these are two wonderful examples in the diagnostics domain. Beto app is a device that is connected to your startup, and it also has some strip basically. You have seen this kind of startup, I believe, on Shark Tank India as well, wherein you can check your blood glucose level at home, and the app helps basically, like, you know, in terms of identifying that sugar level at home basically. So this is something, again, there are some regulatory hurdles in this as well. We'll discuss those later. But this is an idea, this is where people are working, and this is one example. One of the finest, I would say, or the real impactful startups in the healthcare domain is Niramai. If you have known of this startup, we know cancer, if detected at a very early stage, can be cured. As a pharmacist, as from the healthcare domain, we know this. Niramai actually has come up with some thermal analytics and artificial intelligence through which breast cancer is detected at a very early stage. Now, this is something which is about screening and, like, you know, doing it at home basically, like, you know, this kind of technology that is developed basically, and this has a real impact, I would say, on the lives of the people, right? Because it's so you are using technology in your normal problems to come up with a great solution which is also affordable and executable, easily accessible. If all these things are done in that case, I would say all the startups can scale up really very fast, because it's not that, so people want services, products, good products. They are willing to pay for that. They are in a position to give you business as well if they get good kind of products actually, right? So that's about Niramai. Then we also have this something My Udan. My Udan provides these assistant wheelchairs kind of services to, like, I would say the malls, multiplexes, and the superstores and all. One good thing that My Udan is doing is they are marking the spaces or locations. For example, malls. Is that mall wheelchair friendly? Is that multiplex wheelchair friendly? Can you take your wheelchair to each of the location basically? That's what they are marking with the help of some technology basically. These are some of the examples of startups which have been, which are from the healthcare domain. Where is our role as a teacher, as a pharmacist basically? How we can improve the ecosystem, or what is our strength basically as a pharmacist, as a teacher? And I believe this is what our strength is. Our strength really is that we are the only course which has so many subjects, not subject sciences basically. These are different sciences: physics, chemistry, biology, biotech, analysis, herbal, jurisprudence, engineering, IT. We learn everything. Ask a MSc microbiologist, he doesn't understand anything beyond microbiology. So we may not be expert in each of the domain, but there are so many things that we learn in the 4 years curriculum or even 2 years curriculum that we at least are aware, and we can actually work in any of the healthcare domain basically. It's just not about the typical pharma, but entire healthcare domain we can work in basically. That is something which is very crucial or important, and that's how we would be in a position as a pharmacist. I believe if we can use this strength actually to come up with newer products or technologies, we would be actually in a position to contribute really in terms of our strengths to the entire ecosystem, not only the startup ecosystem, but also our entire society. I would say that is the most significant thing about the pharmacist or the healthcare ecosystem as far as the startups are concerned. And this is something which I would say, because still when we speak with the students, they just traditionally जो careers हैं marketing, research and production. Beyond that, if we start to think in entrepreneurship as well, if we can come up with some kind of innovative solutions, and I'll discuss I have a case study actually. The student is 20, I would say she's 27 or 28 years old now. Did her UG from Mumbai University, PG from Mumbai University. While doing her PG, he worked on a project. And thereafter, at the age of 27, she has got 2 pharma startups based in her name. Ms. Ruchi Singh, she's also a part of our platform, Pharma Literati. Ms. Ruchi Singh developed 2, one of them is a novel solution basically for a product, a nutraceutical product. As well as Ruchi also has her own generic company actually, which is different. So she has got 2 basically 2 separate kind of startups basically. Now, at the age of 27, if she can do, I think each one of us has that capability to do that. She also she's one of the youngest recipient of the Pfizer IIT Delhi funding of 50 lakhs, which she had received. It was a funding basically. And she was incubated, her startup was incubated at IIT Delhi actually. Now she's shifted to Dipstro, the Dipsar, which was known earlier as, and she has been involved into what each of you, those who are from Sotex, chemistry, pharmacology, or cognosy are involved into. The first startup she has, in that she has developed a novel drug delivery system product with a problem related to nutrition in rural areas. She worked on that problem. As a pharmacist, she knew this may be a perfect solution. She developed a novel drug delivery system out of that. And after that, now she is working on commercializing that part. Now her journey is something which is perfectly in sync with what I am discussing today, the regulatory aspect as well as the patentability aspect of a typical healthcare startup actually. So in now what we have seen as like, key, the startup can be in any other domain, but then if I have to restrict myself to the pharma only, still I can have these many options. I can come up with some kind of NDDS product. I can come up with some herbal products, nutraceuticals, drug device combinations, diagnostic kits, or the pharma products. Now, the important, as I said, thing are two basically. One is the commercialization which has nothing to do with patenting. The commercialization has to do through typical regulatory pathway or regulatory aspect, what we call as in case of new drug, it may be a preclinical phase 1, phase 2, phase 3 kind of studies that is required actually in case of typical pharma product. What you see it as a new drug or any kind of product basically. Or if it is a generic, then you come up with the bioequivalence studies, and after that you have that opportunity to commercialize your product. Regulatory deals with commercialization always. Patent never deals with commercialization. Why so? I'll discuss in some of the next slides. But then when we think of these kind of startups, the significant things that we need to understand as far as regulatory aspect is concerned are, first thing, clinical trials. Are the clinical trials required for your product? What are you claiming with the products? Are you claiming it as a treatment in case of herbal products? Or are you, so there are so many products which may fall under treatment or nutraceuticals. Okay, in case of nutraceuticals, so if you are not claiming any treatment, that point of time your market is something which is open, and I would say you have better opportunities and lesser studies required. You can get very easily the approval of FSSAI basically for the nutraceutical product. But the moment you claim the treatment part, you need to conduct some clinical trials actually. Okay. Now let us think of, so this is all about your herbal or nutraceutical products basically. And each of the product, let me tell you, the pharma product typically has to go through the regulatory approval pathway or the regulatory thing that is required. What we see, what we study basically, everything like, preclinical, phase 1, phase 2, phase 3. I think each one of us is an expert in that particular domain. We know it. That's what we have been learning since ages actually. Exactly same thing is required. And let me tell you, the costing in that case may be really very huge and high. Exactly same thing happened when Ruchi started with her startup, which is the NDDS based, novel drug delivery system based, old molecules but new dosage form, or the technology is new. In that case, she's going actually for the clinical trials, and for that, those clinical trials, you require funding now, and that's where the role of funding. So one of the most common questions which was asked in Shark Tank India was, oh, if you get this money, what would you do with this money? Actually, none of the investors or the sharks would invest the money into the individual basically. So they won't give you the money, you purchase an iPhone, take an iPad and go globally for a tour. No, they are investing in your business, your idea, the product that would be commercialized. For that, regulatory approval is something which is required. You may need a regulatory consultant or an expert. There are a lot of regulatory consultants. Just like I am a patent expert or a patent consultant, I would say, for many organizations as well as the individuals or universities. Something similar you can have with the regulatory consultants. They are required probably for you to take your product ahead to the market. Now, clinical trials, as I said, is a costly affair as well as it is a long journey basically. So therein the real challenge comes because, as I said, in most of the cases, startups see the growth very rapidly, but herein the time required to commercialize the product may be really very high. We know it typically in pharma. Also, I wanted to let each one of you know that in the startup ecosystem, what we say actually is that this company got a valuation of 1 crore in 6 months time. But actually what happens before actually launching that product, they may have worked for 5 or 6 years for long, which is, I would say, the roots are very strong. They have worked for long. That time no one calculates basically. And what we do is 6 months, 1 year valuation. No, 6 years probably they have already worked on, which was dormant. No one knew them at that point of time when they were working. They did that well that their product could be executed. After execution, the growth started. Everyone sees only the growth phase basically. The dormant phase, no one is willing to see. That's what the clinical trial stage is all about. In clinical trials, you need a lot of efforts, a lot of money, as well as, I would say, a lot of insights basically, because someone is investing money to conduct those clinical trials. Bigger challenge is with respect to drug device combinations and diagnostic kits. So drug device combination, let me tell you a simple example of the inhalers, the meter dose inhalers, dry powder inhalers. If you look at the products specifically there are simple solutions or they are simple powders actually. They are simple solutions or they are simple powders actually which are inhaled. There is no complexity in terms of product as in the end product basically, but the performance of the product is dependent on the device. The performance of the product is dependent on the device. Now herein, it's just not the pharma expertise, but also you need some kind of design expert. See, startup ecosystem, whatever examples we saw, or this one as well, herein you would realize that it's just not about the pharma, but pharma probably in combination with something else. And herein, in case of drug device combinations or diagnostic kits, it may be the engineering a part of that basically, the machinery part, the devices. And let me tell you, globally, each of the company is struggling to prepare a generic for MDI or DPI, meter dose inhaler or dry powder inhaler. Copying a device, copying a drug, copying a solution, copying a tablet may be easy. Copying a device may be really very challenging or really very difficult as well. Because, as I said, the performance of the product is dependent on the device itself and not what is there in the, so as I said, it's a normal solution or the powder basically. So that is something which we need to understand, that the drug device combinations and in cases of diagnostic kits, the real challenge is getting that regulatory approval as well. We also need to understand, I think the way we discuss drugs versus nutraceuticals, herbal nutraceuticals or herbal treatments. Similarly, we can actually also think of the OTC products. But let me tell you, the moment you go to Nutra domain, the moment you go to OTC domain, you have a huge competition as well. You're just not competing with your own category of product, you are competing on various other category of products as well. The business aspect of that is different. So when we think of a startup, ideation, the problem solution ideation is the part is absolutely fine. We can do it at our level. When it comes from the ideation to commercialization, three important things here in case of pharmaceuticals. One is the regulatory aspect, second is actually the business, and I would say the third one is about the commercialization actually now, or the studies that are actually required for commercialization. Now when we think of commercialization, everyone wants it in a way that if it is my idea, it should be only to me. if it is my idea, only I should be in a position to commercialize. No one else except me. What we call typically in the economics or the business terms is the competition. I want monopoly for my product. If I have an idea, if I want to execute, at least I should get some time so that no one else should get that product or ready. Because remember always, there are people who are smarter than us who can execute the plan really very fast, because if they have the fundings, if they have the support, technical support, what we require as a year, probably they can do in a month or a week's time. And yes, this happens. Actually, we have seen it in so many cases basically. So important thing is that you need to protect that IP now. So what we discussed till this moment is what are those startups, what are those different kind of healthcare startups, and what are those regulatory requirements. Of course, the regulatory requirements are in detail, and there can be I would say a separate session on regulatory aspects of NDDS products, regulatory aspect of drug device combinations or diagnostic kit as well. But I think this is something which I wanted to give you an overview basically of the regulatory thing that is important for each and one of the healthcare kind of startups. Now, important, and my expertise where lies, I'm going to discuss about the patent filing, the last part of my session. Patent filing, why to file, where to file, how to file, and lots of other stuff. And this has been something which we have been doing. We have been doing with the institutions, colleges. Many of you, or I would say many of the faces are or the names are known for me. I mean, I have connected or interacted with them for patent filing purpose. As well as we have been also involved with the universities. We're working with good startups. We are working with some of the best companies, big pharma corporates in India. We are also working with 2 US companies, startups again in the pharma domain. We are working with one European company, which is a generic company again. We've been involved in, and this has been our expertise basically. So as I said, regulatory is not my expertise. Probably if you really want a good session on regulatory, I can help you with that, about regulatory aspect of getting your product or the device commercialized probably, or the nutraceuticals or the herbal part. But let me focus more on the patents now. How to file, what are those basics, how does a patent go from lab to the grant stage or the commercialization stage, what are your rights, how do you actually get involved into patent filing as well. Now, I think when Dr. Shilpa mentioned about the profile, that point of time, she had mentioned that I've conducted a lot of IP awareness programs all across India. And throughout these programs, I got a lot of questions, common repetitive questions. And I have listed those questions right here with those answers, which would really help you understand the patent system as such. I just take a very quick 5-second break, I would say. In the meantime, if there is any question, you can put it in the chat box. Okay, cool. Maybe we can have the questions at the end as well. If you want, you can put it in the chat box. Now, for any kind of product or research idea, be it a startup, be it an institute, be it your thesis, be it a big pharma product, be it a new drug, patent is something which is a common aspect. Now, at what stage the patent should be filed? The moment you have an idea, you can file the patent for that. The moment you have an idea, you can file the patent for that. The patent system works on the principle of first to file. The one who files first would be the one who would be getting the patent granted. Now, another thing, for a startup, why should I file the patent application? Or for you as an individual, why should you file a patent application? For a startup, it is very essential that when they're scaling up or they're growing, for them, there should not be any competition. So there should be kind of, I would say, what I call as a monopoly, right? Because it would give them a real good advantage to develop or scale up the business. Now, patent system gives monopolies. That means no one else except you would be in a position to use that technology or research or to commercialize it. Basically, that's how the patent system works. So for a startup to stop others from using the technology, they can file the patent. For you, for the institutions generally, when anyone comes to me with their invention, the very first question I ask them is, why do you want to file patent application? And the very common answers generally for academicians are your NIRF rankings, NAC, NBA, or I would say the CV upgradation, or for the promotion, or even few people say, sir, we want to file a patent because for funding. In fact, I'll tell you, for startups as well, this applies. Many startups approach us, sir, whether that patent gets granted or not is a different thing. We want a patent filed because it would help us when we pitch in. When we pitch in front of investors, they would feel it as an innovative product. That's the reason they file the patent. What data do I need to file the patent application? Honestly speaking, there is no data required initially, at least, to file a patent application. What we call as a provisional patent application, it's not required actually. Okay, this is something which is a myth, that you need to generate all the data before patent filing. No, the moment you have an idea, you can file the patent application. Once you execute it, you experiment it, your proof of concept is ready in terms of what you call as your thesis is ready. For me, for a startup, it's a proof of concept which is ready. That point of time, you can file the complete application. You should take a patent help of patent agent for sure. The reason being that as a startup, you may know the technology well, but you don't know the law, the legal aspect. Patent is a techno-legal document actually. I think that is something which is significant as far as the patent system is concerned, and that's the reason you should be willing to take a help of a patent agent. Also for startups, Government of India has come up with the schemes wherein for the registered startups, they don't need to pay anything to the agents. They just need to bear the Government of India cost actually. Under this scheme, SIPP, Startup Facilitation Scheme for the for patent filing, basically. There are facilitators. I am also one of the facilitators with the Indian Patent Office, under which you just need to pay the fees, government fees. And as a startup, if you are a registered startup with DPIIT, which is under the Ministry of Commerce and Industries, Government of India. Also beyond that, there are lots of other schemes for patent filing. If you are a registered startup, like we have a lot of IPFCs, Intellectual Property Facilitation Centers. There are a lot of schemes by Ministry of MSME, Government of India, which gives you a funding up to 1 lakh for Indian patent and up to 3 or 4 lakhs for the foreign patent if you are a registered startup. Now that's a reimbursement, so you don't need to put any money into it. Can I publish my research before or after patent filing? Before patent filing, it's not allowed. A very fundamental basic thing that you need to ensure: don't disclose, don't pitch, don't present, don't put it in a newspaper, social media, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, nowhere, or YouTube. Can I commercialize my invention after patent filing? As I said, these are negative rights. If I have a product, I have a new product, let's say, I have a patent for that, still I can't commercialize it because I need to conduct the clinical trials for that. The clinical trials part, the regulatory part, and the patent part are not at all connected. They are separate things. A patent never gives you the right to commercialize. It's a negative right. That means a patent gives you a right to exclude everyone else. Everyone else would be excluded. No one else would get that right to commercialize except you. Only you can commercialize that particular product. Cost for patent filing. Now for startups and even for academic institutions, like the cost has been reduced by 80% now by the Patent Office. September 2021, the Patent Office has reduced the cost by 80%. So the official cost, okay? For startups, as I said, that official cost is already reduced, and you don't need to pay for the patent agent as well if you file under that SIPP scheme, basically. Okay. Now, For the academicians, the cost has been reduced by 80%. But then if you are a registered, I would say the university or the institution, you may not be in a position to go under that SIPP, the startup facilitation scheme for the universities. But I think there is one scheme which Government of India, I'll tell you the department as well, it's coming from, I think, Ministry of Education, wherein they are allowing giving you funds for 5,000. Of course, it's just the beginning, up to 10 or 12 inventions a year, and that is coming coming from a Ministry of Education, which is a scheme called Kapila, I think, under Ministry of Education. You can just check, the scheme is still ongoing. I think 28th Feb is the last date before which you can apply as an institution. Okay, it comes under MOE's IIC, Ministry of Education's Innovation Institution Council. If you have a IIC registered, then you can apply for that Kapila scheme, under which you can get up to 50 or 60,000 for 10 or 12 inventions. I don't know the exact number basically, but per invention 5,000 you get. But that's also an amount which is good to start with basically. I think this is not applicable for the startups basically. I'll skip this question, but this is relevant for the institutes. Yes, students can file the the patent application without telling the institute or guide. This happens actually. Can someone else file patent application of my invention? Yes, it is possible. Patent office has a way actually to avoid it later, but then that's possible basically, how we can actually do actually, now patent filing to grant. Now this is where the real difference is. Compared to a research paper, a patent gets published twice, once as an application, once as a granted patent basically. Generally, it takes 3 to 4 years to get a patent granted. Generally, it takes 3 to 4 years to get a patent granted. But recently, in fact, we had a case as an agent, we prosecuted one application which was granted in record, I would say 7.5 months time. Filing to grant, generally 3 to 4 years, or in few cases we have faced 7-8 years as well, as far as the this thing is concerned. I would say the grant is concerned. But then now there are expedited proceedings, as well as the patents are getting pretty fast published, as well as with the early publication. But then it involves a bit extra cost as well, which will be 10% extra. Is publication of application, does it assure you grant of patent? No, not at all. Publication of an application is a normal process that happens during the prosecution, what we call a journey of an application from patent filing to grant basically. Okay. Now the next question here is what is the cost after patent filing till grant? If anyone is really interested, can get in touch with me. I'm providing my contact details. But generally, the patent office cost, as I said, has been reduced by 80%. 80% cost has reduced for the patent, the academic institutions and startups as well. Can I commercialize the invention after grant? As I said, commercialization has nothing to do with the patent filing, but then you shouldn't commercialize before patent filing. That is important actually. I think this I have already covered. Would I be Funsuk Wangdu once patent gets granted? I always like those kind of comments actually, I would say, wherein in the mainstream media or the newspapers, he's a Funsuk Wangdu actually. He has got so many patents basically. If you have a patent granted, no one is going to come purchase it. No one is going to purchase it because it doesn't. If it may not have the commercial value basically. If it doesn't have a commercial value, why would someone purchase it? You want to be Funsuk Wangdu just because you are getting a patent granted. It need to be commercialized. Successful commercialization is a different thing compared to just filing a patent and getting it granted. As I said, if you are a really good patent agent, and there are so many nowadays in Pune, I'm operating from Latur, Navi Mumbai, any location basically, we have got good patent agents, and they would get for sure get your patent granted, but then it has nothing to do with the commercialization aspect. There is also something as a design. I won't discuss this in detail, but there is a different kind of IP, which is a design basically, and this is something which is different from patenting. I won't discuss it in details because it's more related to mechanical inventions. I'm done with my session. Of course, I'll take some questions, but before that, I also would like to tell you how we are approaching the institutions or how we are contributing in the ecosystem, especially with respect to patenting regulatory in terms of the institutes as well as the students. We did a couple of wonderful programs. Just in a quick next 2-3 minutes, I'll tell you what we are doing, how we are actually getting more focused or more specialized, because we have seen a lot of courses on patents and all that. But then recently we did a special course, I would say, with a special focus on commercialization of NDDS, novel drug delivery systems, and 505(b)(2) products. This was done under our banner. Actually, it was just not a course, but it was something wherein we discussed a lot of case studies of product lifecycle management in the I would say the pharmaceutical or the Sotix or novel drug delivery system kind of stuff. Not only that, but IP commercialization aspect, licensing aspect, as well as the policy aspect. Before that year, we had done exactly similar things for the herbal products actually. And to conclude, we are very much connected to the pharma academic institutions. We have list of almost every institute we are working in Mumbai University. I would say for patenting, various FDPs, courses, training. We are providing internships and signing the MOUs as well. Like in Pune, we are working with a few of these institutions. Of course, being connected, or I have this opportunity to be a part of my alma mater on various occasions, be it STTPs as well as the FDPs, the Institute, Pune College of Pharmacy, Bharati Vidyapit Deemed University. It's something which is I would say a home, another home for me, and also connected with a lot of other institutions across Maharashtra or beyond that, in Punjab, Chhattisgarh, Gujarat, and Goa also we are working with. Moving beyond that, we have actually, I would say, as a pharmacist, moving beyond pharma, we are working with some of the best universities as well as institutions across India. St. Xavier's in Mumbai, Hansraj College in New Delhi, which is ranked 10 in NRF rankings. And we are working on various aspects, startups, incubation, entrepreneurship. When I started actually as a patent agent 4 or 5 years back, beyond that, that point of time, I didn't know anything about startup ecosystem. जो भी मैंने आज बोला है, that's my own experience, I would say, for last 4 or 5 years. I have learned a lot. I'm still in a phase of learning. I had failures, which is common for the startup ecosystem. But then for sure, one thing I did is I'm learning a lot, still learning. This is one unique thing about the startup ecosystem. What you learned yesterday, you have to unlearn today and relearn and come up with new product. This is a platform wherein I'm mentioning I had a big failure in 2017 in the edutech domain, and very soon we are coming up with our own edutech platform, which would be live maybe by the that would be our another venture basically, which would be live by the month of April actually. And I think that would be something wherein I look forward to see you once again. Thank you so much. Thank you so much once again, Pune College of Pharmacy, Honorable Principal Sir, Vice Principals, the coordinator for the course, as well as everyone for, I would say, bearing me for last 1.5 hours. I am open for the question. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for enlightening our audience on regulatory aspects and patentability of healthcare startups. I'm sure there are a number of questions. Few questions are there in chat box too. So I'll just go quickly through the chat box question first. Ms. Malti is having one question. That is, in nutraceutical products, which type of actual regulatory involved for planning in startup?
Okay, so Ms. Malti, I think that is more related to FSSAI license that you required, and depending on what you are actually claiming as. So in nutraceuticals, generally, like, you know, whether you call it as a for a treatment or as a just a value addition product, depending on that, you would need a separate kind of regulatory approval. And as I said, I shouldn't comment much because I'm not an expert in that domain. But for sure, if you are interested, my number is available with the organizers. I'll connect you with the right person for sure.
Thank you, sir. I hope Malti is satisfied with the answer. There is one more question by Nandevi. How the commercial value of any product can be increased in small scale startup?
Wow, I think that's a question which would need a lot of thought process actually to answer this. But let me tell you something, and I think that's what the focus of this entire STTPs is about. Your commercial value of any product, basically, I would say, is something which can be increased by means of some kind of basic market research that you are doing before your product is actually you are getting involved into that product development. Basically, what is the need? Is there a market need? Or in typical terms, I would call, which is being used in drug repurposing as well, is there an unmet need? Is there a requirement for your product in the market? Basically, if you can answer this question correctly, then probably automatically your direction is correct, and accordingly you would be in a position to increase the value. And again, another thing I would also definitely like to tell is that to increase the actual value of your product or the business, basically, you need to be more innovative as well for that particular solution. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you, sir. There is one more question by Dr. Kuldeep. He wants to know that is any patent registration required for dietary kind of supplements?
Okay, Dr. Kuldeep, the patents are not mandatory, first of all, to commercialize, as I discussed in my session as well. This is not mandatory. Basically, the registration is optional. Patent filing or getting it granted is completely optional. If you want to block others, then only file. But yes, for dietary or nutraceuticals, patents can be filed. In fact, we have got a couple of patents granted recently for nutraceutical or dietary products as well. We are working in that domain. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, sir. There is one more question by Sania Balera, and that is also in my mind too. So if the product is already commercially sold and if we have to get a patent for reformulation, so can we apply for that same?
Yeah, absolutely. You can. Absolutely, you can do that. But for that, you need I would say, some kind of innovative reformulation. That is one thing. And also, it's always said that I am self-obsessed, but you need a smart patent agent actually to do that as such. Like, you know, if you do on your own, you may not be in a position to get it granted. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, sir. So if any other questions from audience, you are free to ask either by putting it in chat box.
One thing I would like to mention. Thank you very much, Vijay, for that excellent talk. It is indeed a matter of pride for us at PCP that our alumni are getting into becoming such excellent entrepreneurs. So congratulate you on that note, because to get into entrepreneurship, it is itself a very difficult proposition, you know, and you took this task, and it is really I really wish to congratulate, and it's really a matter of pride for us at PCP that our alumni, you know, going into becoming entrepreneurs, you know, and generating such good work. So first of all, congratulate you on behalf of PCP and my own side also. Just one small question. Of course, you did mention that you are not much of a regulatory person, but, you know, just for the benefit of all. See, like nowadays, you know, many of these startups are a lot of tech driven, right? And in healthcare also, there is a lot of actually technology driven startups that are coming up. And maybe someone developing a mobile app or some devices. So for that also, I guess it has come under the regulatory purview, right? For suppose someone is developing these wearable devices, or mobile app, maybe someone developing for just monitoring of the BP or the cardio status and all that. So in that way also, both you can touch upon the patentability of those aspects and the regulatory also of those aspects.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Absolutely. I think this is a complex area. As we move on and as the complexity increases, there would be there are no clarity basically as far as these complex devices kind of stuff is concerned. But as you rightly mentioned, let me speak on each of that for 2 minutes each. Patentability for sure. I know for your softwares or the apps, you can't get a patent. India doesn't allow that. That is first thing. But if you come up with a device, so what we call as typically in the IT domain is a hardware connected to a software, in that case, you can get a patent provided that hardware itself is new. Okay, so those typical patentability criteria are evaluated based on the hardware and not the software. But generally, what most of the startups do, the tech startups as well, they are more driven by the coding or the technology and not on the, so more on the software part and not, rather than the hardware part. That's where the mismatch is for the patent system as well as the typical startup ecosystem is there, because we get a lot of inquiries like this. Sir, we have developed an app or web coding, we want to protect it. No, you can't protect it. It can be only through trade secret, and unfortunately through reverse engineering, any smart software engineer can do that coding again. That's pretty much possible. Now coming to the second question, again, if it's a simple app, if it's a very simple app, which is kind of aggregator like Practo or the MFine, therein definitely you don't need any kind of regulatory approval. But when it's a diagnostic kit, yes, it goes through, the device goes through the regulatory approval. And there are clear-cut pathways. I'm not aware of those pathways, or I'm not an expert. I shouldn't comment on that. But as you rightly mentioned, for the typical diagnostic kit kind of stuff, you need a regulatory approval, because for the diagnostic kits, eventually it's the performance of the kit also matters, and the predictability of the disease or whatever you are identifying. That is the most significant part. And just like your normal product, it has to go through the regulatory pathway. I think I tried to answer your question the way I can actually. Yeah.
There is one more thing in my mind. If time permits, can I ask this thing? Is there any legal mistakes made by healthcare startups, or is there any things which we need to consider before?
Okay. I think general mistakes, both from the not from the regulatory perspective, but patenting perspective, I would say one of the biggest mistakes, not only every startup, everyone does is you publish first. You have that eureka moment in the lab. Arey, mere ko aaj results bahut achhe aa gaye. I still remember a case when I was working with Glenmark. We were trying to file a patent for an invention. And the very first prior art was a LinkedIn profile of our own scientist. उस बंदे ने जिस दिन उसको रिजल्ट मिला ना, उसने लिंक्डइन पे डाल दिया. We have this habit of putting on YouTube, Facebook or newspaper articles. That's the first thing. Second, I think an important thing, not only for the startup healthcare or any kind of startup, is when you disclose it to an agent or any third party or a collaborator, first thing you do is sign a confidentiality disclosure agreement, or what we call as a non-disclosure agreement first. Most of the startups are not aware of this. They just share that idea. Samne wala party, you never know what is there in their mind basically. So these are, I think, some of those mistakes which are common, and especially for those who are students, I would say, for them as well, these things need to be addressed really well. See, the intent of telling you is like, let our students at least know this, because a known enemy is always better than an unknown enemy. Like, and lack of awareness is not a justification in law, basically. कि मेरे को पता नहीं था इसलिए मैंने disclose कर दिया. No, still patent office is not going to grant you a patent. I think I tried to answer your question, Dr. Shilpa.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you very much for throwing light on various aspects of startups in healthcare domain. You have shared a number of case studies also during your session. Definitely, it will help us to build some startup in future. Okay, thank you, sir. So, any more questions from audience? Thank you, sir. So, on the behalf of Bharati Vidyapeeth, Stupid University, Pune College of Pharmacy, we would like to offer a token of love from Pune College of Pharmacy. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for giving an excellent session on the startup and the regulatory aspects of the same. So almost all the faculty members, as they have already said in the chat box, they will be getting connected for your expertise. And of course, even at PCP, as alumni also, we need your expertise in the STCs, as well as for the skilled PCP center also. So we are going to require further your consultation. So thank you, sir. Thank you for being with us for this STC. It was a wonderful session.
Thank you.
We will be taking a 5 minutes break. All the participants are requested to remain logged in to the Zoom link. We'll be getting back after 5 minutes for the second session. Thank you.